Hello, everyone. This is Lina.
And I'm Kensho, and we're the Conductors Collective. This week on the TDO Network, we're really excited to present our good friend and wonderful conductor, Elim Chan. Elim is the chief conductor of the Antwerp Symphony Orchestra and also the principal guest conductor of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. Elim, we're so excited that you get to join us and have some conversations about repertoire. Welcome.
Oh, great to see you again, both of you.
So we wanted to bring you here to talk because we've kind of hung out online a few times over this pandemic, and we've gotten to know you better, and we've really enjoyed kind of talking about, we're kind of in different yet similar stages of our careers, and some of our talks regarding choosing repertoire and that start from that guest conducting, starting guest conducting, and then now arriving to your chief conductor and principal guest positions, how repertoire falls into the conversations that you're having with orchestras. So maybe we can start by kind of describing our own experiences with that, and maybe Elim, if you wouldn't mind leading us off.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really, really good topic to think about. I mean, especially now as we have actually many topics to think about, how to go forward in the future, especially like, how to, plan your repertoire. As a chief conductor, of course, I can have my freedom to do things that I really need to do. And this is also my first chief conductor position. So in many ways, it's a great thing that I have my safe space. And I need to get a lot of repertoire done. Because then I can then plan forward my next, job and next position. Then, I should have a lot of things under my belt. But then at the same time, there are also things that I have to do somewhere else. Especially when I get, guest opportunities. I mean, then there are things that, maybe I should try there, and then to bring it back. It's a very sort of flexible, dynamic, but also very tricky thing to do, because each time, each opportunity, each organization, each orchestra have their own sort of agenda. And I think also, I mean, we, in that case, I think you both understand very well that the first invitation you get from an orchestra, you usually don't really have any options. We can't really wiggle. You just get, the whole thing. Here you go. This is the program. You do it, and you just get to say yes or no. Which is, and I remember, of course, that you just say yes, basically. And I think when we were just fresh out into the business, that's the thing to do, unless it's really, really impossible. Like, for example, do I want to do my first time Tchaik 6 with a very famous orchestra? When I'm like, in my first year of career, then you say no. But usually if it's, it's doable, you would do it. And especially in places that are not so visible or in the spotlight, you would, I think we all jump on it. I guess, right? I mean, both of you will agree with that. But it's really a tricky balance to find, like, when do you really take that risk and when you say no?
Absolutely. I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
Because you touch upon one important thing, which is, for example, doing a really standard and canonic piece at the very first time with an orchestra that is on the spotlight, and therefore you will be on the spotlight even more. So how many times, or do you like, even like if you have a choice, or if you were able to choose, how many times would you do it before stepping into a high profile canonic piece? Like, how many times would you conduct it before? Did you have like a sense of that?
Again, I think it depends on the piece. There are some pieces that, well, for example, I can use this Scheherazade, Rimsky-Korsakov. it sort of became a calling card for me now. Funny enough, many orchestras now would just, sort of when I get an invitation, they would already sort of go for that. But the first time I conducted the piece, it was 2014 in the Donatello Flick competition, in the final with the LSO. I mean, of course, there I have no choice. I mean, again, in the final, that was the piece. And in a way, I'm really glad that I've done it then. But of course, it was super nerve-wracking because I had no idea, and it was in front of the LSO. And after that, I told myself, okay, I need to really do it well. Like, because of course in the competition setting, it's very different when you cram the piece in, and it was a very specific sort of context when you do the piece. So I remember then the next time I thought, okay, I really love the piece, and and I could feel the piece. I love it, and it sort of you sort of get the hang out of it. But I know that I need to do it from scratch, from detail, rehearse it, everything, because from doing that, the process is very different from when you do it one rehearsal, boom, in the concert. Just with the adrenaline, it's very different. So I remember then at the time, I got an opportunity to do a full Scheherazade with a week of rehearsals somewhere in Sweden, in a small place. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna do it. And after that time, then I could say to myself, okay, if now let's say a big orchestra asks me for this piece, I can say yes. And since then, actually, because I start to repeat the piece, and the piece now I think I have almost done it 10 times. And of course, every time something's still new coming up, in the piece. But that's something that now I feel very comfortable. And then of course, this goes into whole planning of repertoire. Because then it becomes something like, okay, if let's say a cancellation came, can I say, please, can we do that? But it's yeah.
It's interesting. I think maybe, how many times we get to do a piece before we feel like we can step in a more, into the spotlight, let's say. But I think maybe we would all agree that the biggest jump between like the levels of comfort that we have with the piece is between the first performance, the first time doing it, and the second. Like I find, and we're in that part of our career where like a lot of things are new, right? Like it's just unavoidable. You can't just suddenly jump into like the third or fourth time doing a piece. So you need to kind of accept that, some things are going to be new and you're going to have to experience that. But I find always like coming back to a piece for the second time, that level of comfort is just like it depending on, I think it's just the biggest leap that you have. So, to answer your question, Lina, I think like at least once is a good number.
Yes.
But we also break that rule a lot, right? Like you were just talking, Elim, about last minute cancellations. And so my first Mahler 4 was just recently because of a cancellation.
Nice.
So then you have to have, and especially in those kind of situations, you have like maybe an hour or two to make that decision, right, with your manager, and kind of saying, man, it's the first Mahler 4. Is this the great situation to do it? But also like we're also conductors and we love this music and we want to do it. So of course, like we can't help but say like, yes, I want to do, new repertoire, right? So I remember when I was starting out, like Terry, my manager, had to be like, I know you want to do new repertoire, but for this, you're going to do this again. I was like, no, but please, like, come on, can we do something new? Like, I want to expand my repertoire. And I remember getting to that week, because that conversation happens months earlier. And I'm getting to that week and I was coming from something else. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that this is repertoire that I know. So that was something that I learned early on, was like, it's okay to, come back to a piece a few times. And it's funny because Lina, you were doing a few Scheherazades this season.
Yeah, I was going to like a Scheherazade tour also. I did my first half Scheherazade in Seattle in February, and I think I had at least 2 cancellations that I wanted to do before stepping into a Scheherazade that I'm looking for maybe in November. We'll see if it's gonna happen. But yes, I think in that sense, what you say about repeating a piece and having it for a cancellation is important. Yeah, because then otherwise you won't have leverage. It's part of your give and take and negotiations.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, it's so weird because yes, Scheherazade is, and it's also a masterpiece. It's a piece that you can spin in a lot of ways, and I think it feels fresh every time I study it.
Yes.
Eh, But it's weird that you said that that is one of the pieces that people really want to hear when you're starting conducting. And you have done Scheherazade too, Kensho.
Yeah, it's similar to you, Lina. Like I did a family concert with Philadelphia with Sherazade, and it was like maybe like one or two cuts, and then I did it in full just this past season in San Antonio. So,
Nice.
I mean, it's a good piece, right? It's a good piece to show a lot. You know, you can, even though it's kind of played a lot, and there's a lot of things you can do with it, and I think you can show a lot as a young conductor. So I think it's why we're asked to do it. You know, I want to shift gears a little bit because we're talking about kind of you know, maybe not having so much choice in the repertoire. So let's talk about the situations in which we actually do have some choice. And I think that usually falls in some programs where you're offered, you know, the concerto and the main piece are already set, but you have a choice of opener. Or you know, maybe there's a situation in which there's a very specific, maybe thematic concert where you have some control over the repertoire. So I don't know, Elim, maybe can you start with just kind of thinking about how do you inject kind of your own ideas about repertoire into the framework that's kind of already existing?
Mm. So in this case, I think I'll recall this experience with LA, because then we have like, so basically last season, I did their Chinese New Year concert, which is a very, quite a standard menu we can serve. Which in this case, Chinese food, you know. So I remember the very beginning of the discussion of the repertoire, it was you know, I got the first draft of ideas, and I remember it was like, okay, you know, lots of traditional Chinese numbers that, you know, you can just play, and, you know that, okay, that we are serving a mainly Chinese audience. And so I understand, okay, we need to fill, you know, get them, you know, give them what they like to hear. And probably these people are not going to the other LA Phil concerts during the year. They just come to this because of the Chinese New Year. And I remember Ray Chan was the soloist, and we were talking about, oh, maybe he should do the Butterfly Lovers Concerto, which is again a very signature Chinese big piece. And so we were thinking like, okay, how do I just take it as it is? Because it's a very standard one, you know that it's gonna sell. And so are we going to twist it? How can you refresh this? And at this point, because I was the LA Phil Do the Mel Fellow some seasons ago, so because of that experience, this was my sort of re-invitation back to the orchestra. So of course, well, I mean, we can be honest here. I mean, I'm Chinese, I'm also a woman. I mean, powwow, I checked two things, and with this concert, it worked really well. So I was like, okay, but really, do because of that, I have a past with this orchestra. Can I use my relationship to say, can we do something cool and new in this? Of course, it could have been easy to just say, sure, I would just take that program. And on that, I remember we say we also need a big crowd pleaser. Let's put Bolero on. And for me, it was like, okay, this is a really strange program, but I mean, okay. But so at this point, I remember, okay, the one twist we can add is, okay, like an opener we can talk about, or we can, then I said, can we actually take out two numbers and put in a new commission? And at that point I said, because they said, okay, but it's a Chinese New Year. Do you know maybe a Chinese composer? Or like, what can we do? Or a woman composer, you see? So there are these like things again coming in text, yeah? So at this point I thought, okay, there is one that will fit both boxes, but it's actually cool. And that's Du Yun, who is Chinese and a woman composer, but she is completely trailblazing. Like she can, you know, she's blending in so many topics and, you know, breaking down a lot of barriers. So I thought, what about give the commission to her and bring her in to renew a typical Chinese New Year concert? And I remember that idea, LA was like, oh, what? You know, it was like a huge surprise, but I'm like, come on, because I think if LA, you know, LA is one of these places where you can take risk, and they have the ability and the money to take risks. So I thought, okay, that's a good place to do it, so let's do it. And because I had that past relationship with them, they're like, okay, Elim, you say she's great, and so let's just do that. And in the end, it was so crazy. It was, we get a commission that was like, you know, we brought a Chinese traditional opera troupe from this little village in China. And, you know, that first time they're outside of China is in LA. And their like first international concert to the world is in Walt Disney Hall, like, you know, in front of LA Phil. So I was like, this is amazing. I remember they were shaking on stage, but they have no idea what is a Western orchestra. They have no idea what am I doing. Like, this doesn't make sense to them. So we, in the end, made a project that was completely from scratch. And it was really like you know, you can bring in the West and the East, like to come on stage together to make something completely, you know, groundbreaking. So I thought, if we as artists, we have something that we believe so strongly, and if you have the leverage in this case, I think that, you know, sort of, you can then say, can we do something like this? We can be crazy to break the mold. But of course, it's not every place is like LA. So there are also places, for example, in Scandinavia, some seasons ago, I mean, it's still a big trend. Women composers, yeah, that's another thing. And usually when you talk about a program that is set and let's put an opener, I bet you two also have this experience where, okay, can we put a woman composer? And it's a big thing now. I mean, of course, it's also really difficult to say, can we find a big piece from a woman composer instead of just fill in the little opener? And also, of course, not just talk about women. Can we put a contemporary piece just to check, like now we have done some new music? It's really tough. And in this case, in Scandinavia, for example, I have a lot of experience where, because they also have like a sort of positive quota, they try to really feature women. So in those cases, I didn't really have much wiggle space, because of course they also try to, you know, showcase Scandinavian women composer. So many of those times you just have to, you have to agree. But then in certain cases, then I can actually say, okay, I understand, but can we actually do a good piece? But, you know, that happens to be written by a woman, but can we, you know, twist it in a different way? And those are very tricky negotiations to have. Sorry, I just have a monologue, but
No,
no, it's perfect. I think we are all in these times, we are really struggling on how to bring these conversations to the table. And it's important to see all kinds of perspectives. I have a different actually experience on that regard, because people look for me almost all the time for Latin American music. And what I do when I get asked all of these programs, or if they want to incorporate, I always go for the biggest piece I can ever think of. And I never ask for the opener. I'm like, okay, I'll do the big piece. Or for example, and then it becomes a little bit of a shock, and then they say, no, but can we do maybe the concerto? So they never go to the opener, but because I always go, I want the concerto for orchestra, or I want the symphony. And it's the way for me to negotiate to put a bigger piece. It's I don't know, it's the way that I have came up with it. And for example, I'm going to Hawaii next season, and it was really awesome how we negotiated the repertoire, because they wanted bolero. It was a French concert, so they wanted, of course, bolero. And actually, Fima Brofman is coming, and he wanted to do Sansan. So I said, okay, bolero, you have like a small concert. Let's do a Fagan piece, like something like, let's do a symphony. Let's not do the opener. And then the opener ended up to be the small classical piece. And then we're gonna have the big symphony by a woman composer. And it's just trying to find those ways to twist perception, that we can get away with a lot of things and have the conversation. I think what you say about being brave, or that's how I see it when you talk about LA. It's being brave enough to put your like put your thoughts into the moment that you're going to conduct, because sometimes when you get out, like when you lose control, then the results of the repertoire might not be as desired. What do you think, Kensho?
No, I love hearing both of your thoughts about this, because I was just thinking about what Elim was saying about pitching Duyun as a composer of merit and not a composer that is a woman and Chinese. And this really speaks to what we're experiencing now with our institutions all around the world, especially in the States, talking about representation. And one thought I have is that so much of what we do is reactionary. Mm-hmm. So we react to a certain position, and we try to react by programming. And those programming ideas come from initiatives, right? Like, we're going to highlight X, group. And where while I understand the thought process behind that, I think it really begs the question of, do we need to make it an initiative, or do we just start programming it in with everything else that we're doing? And I think it's, you can't start anything, obviously the word itself is an initiative. You need to start something, right? Like, you recognizing that you haven't done it, mm-hmm. and you're going to start. But can we get to a point where we don't, I don't want to say we don't need it, but that this is just part of the fabric of the music, because the music exists, right? The music has been written, and it's going to continue to be written. It's just about changing the conversation. And then, we can get into the whole discussion about representation and the administration of the orchestras and all of this. But I think that the question for us, and this is something that I've been wrestling with now during this time, is as a conductor who's starting out on a career and hoping at some point to be a music director or chief conductor somewhere, how do we start this dialogue? How do we change the dialogue? How do we start shifting it so that it's not just a reactionary initiative that brings all these composers to light, but it's just something that is ingrained in the mission and fabric of these arts institutions that have lasted for many, 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 many years, yet now we're starting to talk about it. So yeah, those are the thoughts that I have. I mean, I love that we're talking about this, because I think it's super important as we go forward. This is the first time we're recording it for posterity, but these are the conversations that we've been having, the three of us, and that's something that I've really been fortunate to have during this time, because we don't talk enough about these things, and we don't see each other unless we're just passing each other at the airport. So
but we are actually, this has changed post-COVID or during COVID. We are going to have our little meetings, which I adore. I have been, the fact that we have, sorry.
You just can't wait to conduct. I mean, you're just ready to go.
Yeah, no, I already know. No, yes, what the hell. So the fact that we actually have make it upon ourselves to just sit down for a couple of hours and be friends, and like outside the recording and outside of this, is something that I will always value.
And hopefully we can continue it as we get back.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, no, we will. You said that we were going to do it as much as we can.
No, I'm just making it real now because it's recorded, right? So now there's proof that we've agreed to.
Documented.
So
yeah.
Well, thank you, Elim, for joining us. It's a really great conversation that we need to continue to have in the future, and hope that we can get together soon to talk more.
Definitely.
Thank you, Elim. We love you.
Love to you both.
Bye.